Hi guys, I will keep this short, sweet, and simple. If you want a full breakdown of the kit, feel free to do so. But in case you're here for the initial or my initial impressions of the character, Rinak looks ridiculous. She's a limited character. So to put things or to answer the title of this video very quickly, yes, she is very likely a character that you should pull for as she's a limited character. However, if you're under the same impression that I am, where limited is not really a limited anymore and rather a collaboration character is more the new standard for limited, in that case, I guess technically speaking, you can expect Rinak perhaps to be re-released or reran in the future. And in that sense, if you aren't super FOMO'd or if you aren't super afraid of missing out on a character, Rinak is not necessarily a character you have to pull for. That said, let's actually break down everything that they showed because Rinak looks really crazy. Okay, so first and foremost, they showed us this little animation for her. And okay, I'm a big fan of Wind Rider as someone that's played a lot of Cleave. This animation specifically looks fantastic. We did have this tease, and it's also a bit comedic. Now, the first thing you'll notice here is that she is an Earth Thief. However, you'll also see that she has team-wide attack percent, which is cool. Now, moving into her actual kit, though, the first thing that we're introduced to is her stats. She is a 129 base speed unit with pretty high attack. And that's basically all you need to know about this character, because the next thing that we have to talk about is her S2. Now, by itself, this S2 doesn't look like the most insane thing ever. However, just the fact alone that she can dispel all buffs while pushing back enemies 30%, or I believe it's 40% actually, while also granting herself an extra turn, should kind of indicate or point towards the intensity or how crazy this character could be. Now, we haven't even seen the rest of her kit, but to break down a couple of the mechanics that she essentially goes over, and also, just in case you're curious, I will turn off my camera for a second so you can see what her text does. But she has an ignore Soulburn ER passive or Soulburn effect, which she can, of course, consume for 20 souls. But when she ends up dispelling and pushing enemies back, she also inflicts Pilfer, which is a new effect that decreases the attack, HP, and defense of a target by 20%, while also granting spoils or stacks to, well, in this case, Rinak. Now, to be clear, this applies to only heroes, makes sense, and even remains after dying. However, in terms of what they exactly mean, I don't think they actually mean remains even after dying, as in like if they were to revive or if you were to completely die and then come back later, she would have this effect. But rather, if you have the revive effect, which I may be incorrect on, don't hold me on that. However, I don't think it's very relevant, and the wording on it is a bit weird, as you'll see in a moment. Now, in terms of spoils, now spoils is something that you gain while pilfering, makes sense for the pickpocket name, but spoils increases your own attack, health, and defense by 20%, which of course is what you would be stealing through the pilfer effect. Now this can stack up to 4 times, but as it says again, upon death, dispels pilfer from all enemies. So essentially the stats that you're stealing and that you're gaining go away once Rinak dies. However, because of it, it does mention that, again, you know, upon death, it removes itself from all enemies, but it remains after dying. The only assumption that I have here is that it stays if you have a revive effect or if you have some sort of, well, just that, a revive effect essentially. And otherwise, if she is actually out and if she has been eliminated or dies for real, these effects go away. Now, the next thing we need to talk about is the skill 3, because this is actually a ridiculous ability. Now, we haven't even addressed the fact that she's 129 base speed, but this is why her 129 base speed matters. Her skill 3 is Clumsy Finish. What it reads is that she penetrates the target's defense with an attack, but cannot trigger a critical hit, which is honestly fine, but the damage dealt here increases proportional to the caster's speed. Wow, amazing, considering she's the fastest or tied with the fastest character in the game now. Now, in addition to this, after attacking, it also says that she triggers a security sensor by mistake. And this is one of the first or one of the few introduced mechanics in the game where she actually dispels all buffs from herself, technically a neutral, but almost leaning to a negative effect, but actually inflicts a negative effect to herself in actuality, or in reality, I guess, with her inflicting a self-stun for 1 turn after she uses this S3. Now, what's important to know here is that she does inflict 7,000 fixed damage on all enemies with this specific attack. And as you would probably imagine, the 7,000 fixed damage, depending on who you're using it on, can be really ridiculous. Now, to summarize, this is a character who steals stats from one target, essentially weakens them while providing more stats to yourself and making yourself a bit tankier or a bit more, self-sufficient. And then after you've basically stolen as many stats as you want, you use your S3 and you one-shot someone, right? Well, you'd be interested to know that the target that they decided to show this on is actually a Hua-Young. And the thing is that originally when I saw this kit, I thought to myself, oh, well, maybe she needs to have a stealth mechanic, or she needs to have a mechanic where she needs to stay in stealth for longer. And then with Pilfer, you can eventually blow up something. But no, if you just want to take a look at this really quick, she dispels all of her buffs. She's got around 13.8k HP, so not even like truly, squishy. Does 8.8 thousand damage, then pops the ML Hua entirely. Now, if that seems ridiculous, I'm gonna be honest with you, it is. Now, again, this isn't necessarily even something where it feels like, there's like there's a very obvious counterplay to this, or there's very clear counterplay to this outside of obviously someone like Zio. But this is literally a 129 base speed character who can one-shot arguably one of the most frustrating and one of the most annoying to deal with characters in the game. And that's while she is very likely, one of the fastest characters in the game. Now, moving on from this, we also have her S1, which is it's just a generic a generic basic attack. It does a little bit of damage, but doesn't look too impressive. However, next we have to talk about her artifact. Now, before we even get into the artifact, I do see Robin in the background, and me personally, I'm a big fan of Robin. I'm very excited to see when Robin gets announced. But in terms of this actual artifact, it may also tell us about how specifically Rinak wants to be played. Now, when you have it maxed, it increases your attack by 20%, and at the end of the turn, when the caster has a debuff, you increase her combat readiness by 30, or the caster increases their combat readiness by 30% and grants stealth for 2 turns. Now, I don't know about you, but for thieves, this is actually kind of interesting. It does feel like there are maybe some cheese tactics that you could run here. I'm looking or thinking about characters, maybe like Cannaaaa, who sometimes gets prioritized or debuffed, and then having the stealth or not having access to hitting the Cannaaaa afterward could make this very frustrating. I could also imagine this for a character like Bloodblade Karen, where sometimes you'll take someone like Veronica to try and deal with that. But now if you have a debuff on top of yourself, you can go into stealth and give yourself combat readiness push, which seems pretty insane, to be honest. But now, I do want to make it clear that obviously with this artifact specifically, it's designed specifically for Rinak, as basically the way that they show it in the showcase is that after she uses her S3, she prefers to, be safe or be a little bit more cautious or be a bit more protected. And despite her having Destina and Armin, by the way, which is like a ridiculous team composition. Like, this isn't even like they super giga buffed Rinak and she looks ridiculous. I mean, right side is literally Crow, like an Aureus holder plus Hua-Young, and obviously Hua-Young can't have any buffs affected to her anyways, but like for this Rinak to basically not be super buffed up or not to have like any padding for how ridiculous this looks, and for her then to one-shot this thing is ridiculous. But moving back to what I was mentioning earlier, now after she has this stun, she activates her artifact, and that's where she enters into this 2-turn stealth. And for some cases, you could argue that having the stealth doesn't really do anything, or maybe you could be really, really tanky on Rinak, and we'll have to see and wait for Rinak's multipliers to see if you can honestly just rely on the fixed damage, and you could maybe just run max HP and forget it. You don't even need the attacker. You don't even need the stealth. Maybe you can run something ridiculous like Arnel or something. Who knows? But long story short, guys, in terms of this character and my thoughts on her, she looks absolutely ridiculous. A 129 speed self-sufficient target is nothing to joke about. Virtually every time outside of, even Kateron had his moments, but not really as an opener. But In terms of 129 base speed units, there's almost never been a time where a character that has been released over 120 or so speed has not been relevant or meta defining in some way, shape, or form. We've had characters like Sid take over the meta after he was buffed. We'd had characters like Assassin Sid be super relevant. Payra, Ran. You can think of every speed unit that we have in the game, and unlike the other characters where in most cases there's something like an RGB unit or a Covenant or maybe even an ML5, this is our, if I'm not mistaken, our first true limited 129 base speed character who feels like she is an assassin, true to her name and true to the Wind Rider playstyle. But as always, guys, that's going to be it for my first impressions and my thoughts on this character. Genuinely, but even though she has a lot of probably, I guess, concerns perhaps about like the way that her kit works in terms of staying alive and such, I do think that just the fact that she can one tap any character straight off the bat makes her extremely powerful. And again, like being able to pilfer or steal stats from someone is also no joke, as this is kind of like a reverse or a different kind of version of something like injury. Because this time around, you're not only injuring technically, you're also stealing defense and attack. So it's like a super, super triple threat debuff that is very, very powerful and very strong. And personally, I'm going to pull for and be excited for this character. Also, I don't know if you saw that. Her cooldown is pretty low, relatively speaking. Anyways, that's going to be it for today, guys. She looks fantastic. I would pull for her. Stay safe, stay healthy. Oh, boy. Goodbye.